This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by the Shared World, now open for submissions at sharedworld.ca.
Attention, citizens! It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. Or I should say, we often claim we're going to, and then talk about the business of making stuff. Today, we're actually going to talk about how genres get made, not just stories, but I hope to talk about the work, the line, the world, the thought, the reason behind stories. And I have brought my Shared World collaborators, Chadwick Ginther.
Hello.
And Jonathan Ball.
Hello.
To discuss our Shared World stories, not in the lofty top-down view of the fantasy maps we presented at the front of the books, but in the granular mud of the stories themselves, the words, the process of making stuff. And the reason I want to do this, gentlemen, is we've been getting a lot of submissions for the Shared World stories because, dear listener, there are submissions open, and we love it. And I don't want you, dear listeners, to believe that your process is in any way different from ours. We struggle with every word like everyone else, and I thought what better way to prove it than to talk to the authors and be held accountable for the difference between being an author of a work, the difference between the work and the line and the word, the thought and the reason that went into those words and lines and stories in the first place.
What do you mean by line?
Great. This is good. We're going to get into it. Now, before we get really into it, I'm going to ask Chadwick the following to recount part of a story he started telling that I yelled at him, no, stop, save it for the podcast. So you were setting up the story as follows, that you had found a draft of an original novel of yours that was a sword and sorcery story, just as the Shared World is inspired by sword and sorcery. And you thought, maybe there's something here to salvage. I can rework these old gems. And instead you found that it was
Unsalvageable. The novel itself is unsalvageable. It was the first novel I ever completed when I decided to seriously begin, the process of becoming an author. Very much bit off more than I could chew. Multi-point of view, sprawling, original completed draft, I think, was 135,000 words. I cut it back to just under 120. Under some editorial advice that as a first-time author, I was never going to sell anything.
And you thought it's lean fighting
weight. It's
weight
lean
down.
and tight, yeah.
And now you read it and you thought, oh God.
Oh, there's so many pacing problems, and again, very much of its time and very much of what I was reading and influenced by at the time. So, like, you can file the numbers off of the George R.R. Martin books and the Scott Lynch books that I was reading at the time.
Can I share this?
But
this is what makes me do this. My first real solid, earnest attempt to write a complete novel, I had the grand misfortune of having the audacity to believe it was good enough to pass to Steve Erickson to get some notes on. He was so polite and nice, but the brevity of his notes let me know instantly that there wasn't a story worth reading in there.
She was right, not great.
I mean, I think it was amazing. And there was evidence when he asked cogent questions that he had gone through the bulk of the manuscript. Whether he read the whole thing, I hope he didn't. Now, in retrospect. At the time, I was like, yeah, he read my book. And then I was like, oh no, he read my book. Yeah. So I've been there. I've been there feeling like it's bad, but I unfortunately showed it to someone who is really good at writing sprawling multi-POV fantasy epics. And now I'm embarrassed.
yeah, see, I built up to that, and in that I started out with a writing group of people who were all aspiring, all of roughly the same, ability and drive. And, many of us fell by the wayside over time, but it wasn't until much later that I ended up showing it to once I had got it as good as I believed I could with my friends' feedback.
Oh, I wonder. I need to expand my circles here. Above the work is the author. Above the author is the group. That really, because I also had a writers group that I really am so thankful that they kicked my stuff downstairs a lot.
And I mean, that group absolutely made it a much better novel
Yeah.
than it would have been. But there's only so much you can do when you're reading a chapter a month
Right.
as a group, right?
Yeah.
For them to be able to see the whole picture. And I did get feedback on it as a whole piece at the end. But yeah, one of the reasons I was looking at it was I wanted to either not see if I could sell. I wasn't expecting I would be able to salvage the book as a whole.
But
But was there things in there that would maybe fit into the shared world, or would
you're
become
looking
it would
back.
become its own, could become its own thing, because it was written in a sword and sorcery vein, and I had, other than the shared world stories, I hadn't done a lot of that type of writing
That type of
more
writing.
recently anyway.
But you said there were sections that survive. So what is it about your modern writing sensibility that identifies something salvageable to you now that didn't see it as valuable then? Or like, what is the difference between you as a writer, you think, that says, oh, this was my blind confidence, this novel is tight, 120,000 words, to, oh no, what have I done? Right?
Well, I think the biggest issue with it is just the pacing issue and the spread of the characters. So four of the 6 point of view characters are all traveling in the same group, and so I used whichever character,
Right.
and they have most of the narrative. So I used whichever character I thought that chapter would be most impactful
totally get-
from their point of view.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, oh, I need to show what's happening over here and what's happening over here.
But
And so I had these wide, two other widespread characters to show you what else was happening.
I
I
feel
wonder
so
if a person who doesn't really write would understand that.
Well, this is what I was going to say. So I'm going to ask Jonathan to
all
unpack what he's saying. The tone of his answer is exactly the difference in the space of time. When you are first writing, you would say, oh, there's 6 POVs and 4 of them are in the same group. And you'd be so thrilled. But with
It's the
some
same group.
with some experience, you go, oh, 4 of them are in the same group. Right? So what is it that you would say?
Here's the thing I say to students, because when they have usually it's not that exact issue because they're less ambitious, but like I just mean like they don't have giant 128,000 word stories. They're like, writing a 10-page story, but they'll make that same kind of mistake where I'm like, and what I say is like the test of it always is who has the biggest problem, because whoever has the biggest problem is the main character, or should be. They should be the protagonist because they're the ones who have the most at stake. They're the ones who have the most motivation to solve their problems. They're therefore going to be the most interesting to the reader and so on. So if you got like 4 people in a group, maybe they all have their own problems, but one of them has the biggest problem. They're more interesting than the others from the reader's point of view.
I'm going to anticipate a dear listener's thought. Well, that's not always true that dear listener is saying. I know. They're going to say, well, Julius Caesar, he had the biggest problem, but it's not about him. You're not Shakespeare, so just settle down.
It's also a misunderstanding of what a problem is,
Right.
in a story. That a lot of, again, I have an exercise I do with students where I'd be like, okay, what's let's just do it right now.
Okay,
You might just, or you and Chadwick.
I've moved my chair to sit closer to Chadwick. We are now in class.
So I always use Salima, our friend Salima. I love Salima's name, and I always use her name as the example. So like, let's say Salima, let's say Salima gets fired from her job. What's her problem?
Well, it depends on the day. Is the rent due?
Let's say the rent's due. What's the problem?
Problem is she has to pay her rent. It's not that she lost.
Why
her
is that a
job.
problem?
You need money to pay your rent. You get money from your job.
If
You
your
need-
character cares, this is a good thought experiment, because if your character cares about whether or not they pay their rent on time, is a character
Right. Now you're getting to it. Usually they take a long time to get there.
Yeah.
Usually they just talk about events in the world.
Yeah.
And like any good therapist, I have to like point out, like, these are just events in the world you're talking about.
Right.
Whether it's a good or bad or a problem, like until your subjective point of view, like until the character is caring about it and why do they care about it? Why does it matter to them? Until that starts to come in, where their attitude toward the event is now creating a problem.
That becomes
And often their attitude, not the event, is the problem.
Yeah.
And often they have to change as a person in order to realize it doesn't really matter, whatever, right?
All right. This one is a nickel. This one also is a nickel. And here's a quarter. And another quarter. And a penny. See? Nickel, nickel, quarter, quarter, penny.
Are any of these coins worth anything?
No.
They always want to go to like things like, oh, well, she's going to be homeless. Like, well, why is that a problem?
Yeah.
It doesn't really become a problem on a certain level until they care about it and it affects like their self-identity or whatever.
Because the character, how I think about it when I'm writing is that it's like the old adage that like people go towards pleasure and away from pain, right? So like you have to know what pleases and what hurts your character in order to characterize the event.
And if you get down to the point where it's like, okay, well, now she's going to be out of a place to live. She wants somewhere to live. But why does that matter? Why does that matter? Why does that matter? Well, you start to get down. Eventually you get to the point of like, she'll feel like a failure, like she's let her parents down. Right. Why does that matter? So like, well, really her problem is that she cares too much about what her parents think.
Yeah.
Versus like actually taking ownership of her.
Because like in
whatever, like she gets to that point.
Story, to use that as an example, I have characters who there's like some human trafficking. There's kids have been stolen and they've been taken away. And that is the character's problem. But from a certain objective point of view, the problem is that they have to allow them to be possessed by a potentially evil spirit before they can do anything about the kids.
But they don't see that as a problem.
But it's to them not a problem.
They're under what I call a spell.
Yeah.
Which is something I picked up from, I forget who, I think Amnon Book Day Bender, but there's a metaphor of a spell. Like a lot of times characters have a character flaw where they operate as if under a spell. Like they don't see something. Yes, they see it. They're looking at things the wrong way. I always use Lightning McQueen as the example. Because Lightning McQueen is always trying to win the race, but of course he never wins any races. Because ultimately what he has to learn in every movie is it doesn't matter. Winning the race isn't what matters.
Yeah.
And he has to give up winning the race to, like he wants to have friends. He thinks if he wins the race, he'll get some friends, but he doesn't realize he already has friends.
Yeah,
so
and to your example, winning the race is his problem.
His problem is he thinks
everyone else
would
be the solution, winning the race. Yeah. His problem would be winning the race.
But it's like he lives under a spell and he thinks winning the race is going to solve his problems.
Right.
But winning the race is his problem. That he's trying to win the race. Yeah. He doesn't see it because he's under a spell. Galaxy Quest is another great example. Anyway, you just keep going.
So then, these are the thoughts that go into around why a character does a thing. I want to take it a little bit down to into the mud. When I'm talking about the work and the line, I'll give you an example of exactly what I mean.
Give me like a sentence?
I'm going to give you a direct example, Mr. Teacher, so just settle down. All right? The fire crackled as the horse flesh spit and sizzled. Period. Draxus let the words hang. Period. The sorcerer shadow motionless. Period. Face still hidden. Period. But she felt him smile. Now, the reason, dear listener, I pointed out the periods is that if I read it out loud without that, the fire crackled as the horse flesh spit and sizzled. Draxus let the words hang, the sorcerer's shadow motionless, face still hidden, but she felt him smile. You'd assume there were some commas in there, but there are none. Now we're in the mud of the lines of your story as written, which is, by the way, there were once words. So thematically important. This is a Draxus story.
In the book Draxus, which you can
Right? Don't make it a commercial. We're talking about craft. Right?
Well, but so when are you talking about how you get down to that?
I want to know why those are all. I just want to, like, it seems like a stupid question, but
that's a good question.
Why is it periods and not commas?
That's a very astute thing to notice, by the way, that there are periods and not commas, because you're right. The grammatically correct syntactical structure there is to use commas instead of periods in a couple of those, particularly around the face still hidden.
Yeah. specifically. Like this is something that yourself,
So the
as an
answer is-
editor, or Sampico as an editor, would make a suggestion to me that this is a fragment and you should adjust it.
And I
some-
good suggestion, and I would
sometimes
ignore
would
it.
say yes or not. And
You
you've
give up my sentence fragments from my cold dead hands.
That's right, from my cold dead hands.
So in this,
This is
case,
perfect,
but it's
fragments.
very easy to overdo sentence fragments.
Yes, but hold on, you don't get to jump high yet.
Anyway,
You've got fragments down here in the mud, and we both admit.
I got fragments down to a science.
Oh, you do,
this-
do you?
and
I'm going to
this-
move back my chair over by Chadwick.
Anyway, the
Tell us,
answer is
Otis.
unfortunately very simple. It's just a pacing issue. Like you were talking about pacing. It's pacing because she's waiting for him to say something. And so I want the reader to wait for something to happen. So as things are happening, I just want to pause it longer.
Punctuate
And I want
rhythm.
I want to punctuate it so that you have to keep stopping and waiting. There's like that tiny little stop and wait when you expect a flow.
Okay,
That's all.
Well, and
There's
as
it's a
for
pacing.
me as a reader, I still find a period to be a bit of a full stop.
yeah.
And I recalibrate for the next sentence, where even the longer sentences, I just kind of let them flow over me as I'm reading.
Let them.
And occasionally, I'll have to, like, if I'm tired, I'll have to go back and like, I need to start from the
I'll-
beginning of that. But with a sentence like what you read from the Draxus story, it's
yeah.
stop,
So
stop, and
It's
you're
'cause I
and
want the
it
reader-
will make me wait.
I
as
want
well.
the reader
It's
to be in
very
her
functional.
position.
in her position
Yeah.
of that.
That's my prime goal for things like that. Whenever I'm deviating, is because I want the reader to be in the position parallel to the character.
Okay, so then this is what I mean by the line. Now you had a thought, and your thought is, I want the reader to be in her position. Or pardon me, that's the reason. The thought, though, behind the line, what is the thought that is going into deciding when it's okay to break the rules? Like fragments from our cold dead hands.
When I can push the reader closer into the position the character's in. Because the problem with the Draxus as a character and the Draxus stories, like the problem.
Of which you are the author, so you're allowed to call bullshit on
Well, what I
yourself.
mean is like, there's a problem. To me, I look at writing as problem solving. There's a problem, and I'm trying to solve the problem. So first you have to figure out what the problem is. The problem with Draxus is she's an anti-hero. And
Right.
the problem of Draxus is the reader shouldn't want her to succeed. Everything she's trying to do is a terrible thing, or it seems like she's on the wrong path or whatever. So there's areas where she doesn't see things the way we would see them, is sort of the baseline. Like she's, eating children, right? She doesn't see it as being a big deal.
This isn't a problem to her.
It's not a problem. Like
Right.
she thinks it's, fine. That's what you should do. Right. And so the reader's not going to share that position, right? Basically. So because you've got this immediate way where the reader's out of sync with her point of view, the only way she works is as an anti-hero figure. And the only way an anti-hero figure works is if you want them to accomplish their goal. You may not like them or like their methods, but you want them to succeed.
And
I
sometimes
also
it's a-
can't want, but also like, there's not really a good reason to want her to succeed.
Crime novels and mystery novels and horror novels really are about wanting to see what horrible thing will happen next. And so you become invested in seeing the horrible thing even if you don't agree with it.
So
Now hold on, now we came
But-
too high. I want to stay down
let me
in the
just,
mud.
but I'm to get to your answer though. So
Climb down into the
because
mud.
I have the problem of she is an anti-hero, but she's not a normal anti-hero where we want her necessarily to succeed. I need you to be interested in her. Like I still want you to want to be close to her because you're fascinated with her point of view. Well, why does she want to do this? Maybe you don't understand why she wants to do it, but why does she want? So I have to give her deep reasons that are understandable
Okay,
why
so
she would want to.
Let me follow up then. How, down in the mud, does the fragment make the reader more interested in her?
Because it only works, the whole thing, only works like if you feel close to her position and point of view, even though you don't share it.
And so you think the
So you're
truncation
standing-
of the idea.
In that instance, you're standing beside her point of view.
Okay, because this is my counterpoint. I have a different sentence. This is Chadwick's sentence now. Chadwick, the spotlight falls on you. We're coming down
Smells
into the
like
mud.
ambush.
It smells like an ambush. This is from your story, Red. She couldn't risk using the torch, dash, this close, comma. She'd only burn herself, dash, and her sword was no good for this engagement. There's some complicated grammar at work there. So just with the right, to say it trippingly, she couldn't risk using the torch. This close, she'd only burn herself, and her sword was no good for this engagement. But you could have done that with fragments. You could have done that with 2 sentences. You chose to put this dash parenthesized aside. What the hell is going on?
Well,
A totally different approach, but I'm right there with the character doing a thing. The same reason.
Red is a much better sword fighter than I am, for one. And so,
It's a valuable rationale.
yeah, and again, that's that sort of in a fight, she is going to be flowing from movement to movement. And so I didn't want truncated things for her. I felt like that would be more of a in distress. That would, like, fragments would come out if she's in a fight when she's being more tested in distress. She knows what she has to do. She just has to do it.
I'm gonna be a writer someday.
You know how that typing upsets me.
I'm sorry, Mama. A writer writes.
I would like to present your own words as the perfect justification to what you just said. Because the 2 sentences that follow, this notion that she expands time to make all these considerations versus what happens next. So she couldn't risk using the torch. This close, she'd only burn herself, and her sword was no good for this engagement. The man's cudgel rose, period. Red waited, period. Right? Everything's up to what that guy does. She knows everything that's going to happen before it happens, and it's the fragments from your cold dead hands further underline that she's in control of all of these thoughts in one long flowing sentence, and if she just has to wait for the guy to do something, right? And in the space of a cudgel rising and falling, there should be no time at all. And using a period creates this huge space of time for her to decide things. I just think that that's such a beautiful, simple solution to the writing. And dear listener, I should let you know, I did not tell either of them what pieces I'd be throwing at them. They had no chance to prepare for this. So
Your note about how in the other sentence, if it was fragmentary, it seemed like she was in distress.
Yeah.
That's, I think, exactly what I'm trying to do in my example is I'm trying to put her in distress, and the reader sees it, but she's trying to hide that she's in distress. But I want the reader to see it. Like, that's to me, the trick of it always is, how do I make the reader go into the position? I'm always trying to manipulate the reader.
see, I am too, but I think of it very differently than both of you. I think both of you, maybe it's just that both of you are better writers or more thoughtful in your approach from the mud. I sometimes will make a choice solely on the cadence of the sentence as it is read aloud, and not as the role it plays in guiding the reader.
Well, that can
could-
absolutely happen for me too, because that's one of the last things I do before I hit submit is
Right.
read the story aloud.
Aloud.
I'm mostly in those instances, I'm mostly looking for dialogue where
Yeah.
like, oh, does this sound like something somebody wouldn't actually say or feels odd to say? But at the same time, it's like, this is grammatically correct, but they would absolutely say it this way.
Yeah, so then what is the role? Now we're going to just come slightly out of the mud. We can stand up. Our feet are still in the mud, but we're just here on the ground still. You both chose, in both of these examples, and throughout the stories, to ignore grammar as it suited you. But it's not careless. And I think when I look at my own stories from early, this is why I bring up this example. When I look at that story that I gave to Steve, there were careless uses, careless abandonments of structure that I hadn't made thoughtful decisions at. They were just mistakes. When does the ability to determine, no, a fragment is the right choice, even though it's incorrect grammatically? How do you develop that skill? And it's not by right. You have to write bad novels. This is my
I think you
opinion.
have to. I was talking to.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
you'll absorb some of it from what you read.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to, even when you're starting out, share your writing with other people,
Yeah.
or share your writing with people who are at a writing level above yours.
So the
So that
group-
you can, maybe you don't want to go to, if it's the first story you've ever completed, maybe you don't want to send it to Steven Erickson. Right. But
newsflash,
but
don't send it your first story.
but maybe, someone who has published a couple of things and gone through editorial, or maybe you want to go talk to the writer in residence at the library or something like that, where you can get more of that, those things that you haven't thought of.
And if you're
it would be more impactful
Yeah.
if you used a fragment here. It would be more impactful if you let the sentence flow over the reader here.
I was talking about this thing earlier today with someone, and I was saying like that people always want to math this stuff out, but you have to just
Vibes.
with
It's
creative
all
stuff.
vibes.
Yeah, with creative stuff, you just have to do it and see does it work. Like if you're if you want to know if a joke is funny, you tell someone the joke and see if they laugh.
Yeah.
You can't just math it all out. You know.
For example, I was at the zoo just a couple days ago, and there was a baguette in the cage, right? And when I asked the zookeeper, like, "What's up?" and he said, "Well, it's bred in captivity." Right? If you read that joke, it's so stupid. But if you say it out loud to people, there will be that pause.
Yeah.
Every person I've ever told that joke to, I predict your response. Fuck this joke. And then you laugh.
Well, because after a second, I thought you were telling a real story.
That's the only way to tell a joke.
But that's the thing, because but that's the thing. Like, I feel in a lot of like I understand the tendency to want to be analytical and math it all out, because I'll do that. But I recognize that at a certain point, you just have to start writing the thing.
But you learn by
see if
doing
it works.
Yeah.
So you just have to, for weird stuff like that, you just have to try it and see what it looks like and see if it works.
So different than your, Jonathan, your path and my path, Chadwick, you have more, I think, facility with and experience with the short story as a form. You can try to dodge the compliment, but the truth is you have a lot of short stories published in the world, and that means they have run the gauntlet against editors and other stories of an equivalent theme, of an equivalent length, of an equivalent professional quality, and has won the test from the sand. And so, has your facility with short story writing increased? Do you find you have more success now writing short stories, or is it the same battle of what Jonathan's talking about? Well, I'll try it, see if it works. I'll try it and see if it works.
Well, it's always battle.
Yeah.
It's always been a battle. Like the first editorial comment I ever got back on a short story was, "This feels like chapter 1 of a novel." Right? Like, because at the time I had no experience reading short stories. Right. I had just received for the time of the market, poor advice from somebody who came from a different writing time period. The way to break in is to write short stories, sell them to Analog or Asimov's or Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, like all those big print magazines, most of which are not the magazines, not that they're not around, but they're not the magazines that are really prevalent. Like now you're seeing more of the digital online magazines like Uncanny, or things being published on Tor.com. And
so I want to ask you a question about short stories, or about
but I started writing them not being a reader of them, and so I was making mistakes.
Once you read short, I love short stories. I just looking at my audiobook list, my most recent short story collection, Book of Swords Unabridged. There's a ton of writers in that one, but Garth Nix's To Hold the Bridge short story collection I'm going through right now, and it is such a masterclass in, I think I'll try a different genre and nail it every time. It can be so daunting to read a collection of short stories and be taken so effortlessly and simply into another world. How?
I puttered around, and it was slow to begin with, but as I, got my first bits of editorial from those short stories, then I had something else to go on, like sort of in terms of pacing and what a short story moment is, and not trying to use them to audition novel protagonists necessarily. Just like, this is the character for this story and this is all it needs to be. But as I published a few more, I like them for the, and this is nothing to say their value for readers. I like them as a writer as something that I could get out and complete and have a thing to show that I'm still a writer, when in between novels, which take a lot longer. And so
as they say in Throw Mama from the Train, a writer writes.
Yeah.
Always. And also, Owen doesn't have a friend.
Who the hell are you?
I'm Owen's friend.
Owen doesn't have a friend.
The majority of my short story publications have come from anthologies with a theme. So I think that maybe is more of my strength, is writing to a theme. It's like they're like Hauntings in Hoarfrost was one that came out this year, and so it was all gothic horror with a winter setting.
So I'll give you, in the strata that I laid out at the beginning, I said, author, work, line, world, thought, or word, pardon me, thought and reason. Your reason for writing short stories is that you like to finish stories. It makes you feel like a writer to have finished a story and present it. The thought of what you're writing may have come from someone else, right? And then the group that you're sharing that story with is people that you hope will understand your motivations of writing. But how do you then take someone else's thought about your story, for example, an editor's note or a rejection? What is your process of putting that back into the work of the line and the word and the story and the thought and the reason? How do you, and we're in this position, why this is on my mind is we're getting submissions. And we have to be able to somehow constructively tell people, fuck no, right? To their stories. And it not,
It's easy when they're set in Missouri, not the shared world,
right? But
No
you see what I'm
offense,
getting at?
but like,
What I'm trying to say is, one thing that we can help with is that it's important to us to receive criticism, and that we each have a different process of distilling it into the mud of our work.
Well, I mean, when I was a younger writer and I would get actual feedback with a rejection, I would often take another look at the story, and eventually I just kind of stopped giving a shit. And I would instead send it out to the next market, and maybe they'll like it. And it's like, because I had other stories that I wanted to write, and I said what I wanted to say with that one, and maybe it's not perfect, but doesn't need to be perfect, because it'll never be perfect. But if it's close enough for an editor that they're willing to work with it, then I'm willing to work with them.
Interesting.
And if they're just no, or they're like, oh, if you did this thing and made it an entirely different story, well, I didn't want to write that story. If I wanted to write that story, I would have written that story.
Yeah.
So I'm sending it out to the next market. I had a story that it was rejected, I think 22 times, and then it found an editor that wanted to work with it.
I always say it has to become more what it is and less of what it is not. And if it's not following that principle, and whether it's my edit change or your change, doesn't matter.
So what you're saying is, as long as the note you agree is helping make it more what it is, it's easy to
If it's
include.
going to make it more what it is, great. Let's do that. If it's going to make it less of what it is, then no. To your point, it's got to be what it is. Why would I, even if it would be a better story if I moved it in a different direction, I don't care. Because it's not that story.
I've talked in other mediums about my reluctance sometimes to read too closely to the genre I'm writing in. And I reflected on it a lot recently to figure out why that's true. And I figured it out. So gentlemen, this is why. Early in my short story submission process, I was just a teenage boy, grade 9. And I had won a short story contest, got a bunch of money. And I thought, this is so cool. You can just write stories and people send you checks. This is the greatest thing ever. So I started writing stories. And back in the day, you'd go to the library and you'd take out the writer's market handbook and you'd start looking through and you'd submit stories all over. And I got lots of feedback back. I think partly was the curiosity of editors who knew I was young. like submitting stories far outside my weight class. So they were giving it a good read and trying to like help be a mentor a little bit. But one note that I got was a circle, 2 paragraphs were circled. And the note was, I know you wrote both of these, but it feels like a different author wrote each of these. And you should figure out what your style is.
Yeah, right.
And I knew what they were talking about because I remembered putting the story down for a little while, starting a different book, reading a different book, and then picking up the story and realizing that what I had done was imitate the cadence of what I was reading. And that this editor, without knowing that, had put their finger right on the point where my bad habit had shown through the writing. They didn't know, but they could tell. And I was like, oh, people will always be able to tell my influences. So I have to not let the influence show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't agree with that.
That hurt.
But I
It's
see what
just
you're
little
saying.
boy
Yeah.
Gregory being damaged in a
Yeah.
certain way. Yeah.
I think you should read everything in the genre if you're working in the
I agree to that. But
at
not
the
when
time
I'm
you're
work-
writing it.
Yeah, I can't.
See,
do that.
I mean, whatever works for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only reason my stuff is of any interest at all, is because if I pick a subgenre or something, I'll go into it, and as I'm writing, and I'll just dial right into what is not happening or in this genre.
Yeah. Well, and when I was trying to actively get better at short stories, I was awarded a grant from Manitoba Arts Council for a short story collection that I'm still trying to find a home for. But
Go Canada.
yeah, no, and part of the grant application was that I was going to like actively read like all the award-winning stories for the year.
You do the work.
Authors,
Yeah.
like marginalized authors, like not just my favorite
Yeah,
short story writers. Like sometimes it would be like, oh, that sounds like a cool title. I've never heard of this writer before. I'm going to read it. And I read like stories that were essentially like written like listicles, or they were written like, it was amazing. Like I went everywhere from reading like 300 to 600 word flash stories to novellas, and I think I read over in the span of the year I was working on that grant project, I read well over 300 short stories.
Yeah.
And just like
All
it
at
gave me
once.
ideas to just like, oh, I want to try an epistolary story now. I want to try this. I want to try this. And it made it.
That's one of the nice things about short stories, just as an aside, is you can read 300 of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Comics the same way. Like you get to try out different things in comics because
Yeah.
you can totally abandon the genre of the last one visually while keeping your cadence as a writer.
But to read 300 novels, like how long would that take you?
Yeah.
You know, like
A long time.
if you're fast, it'll take you 3 years.
Yeah.
If you're fast, you know.
Well, it would take me longer than 3 years. to
I
read
know,
100
but I'm
novels.
just saying, like,
Yeah.
that's like reading 100 a year. And so,
If I would have stayed at the event period part-time job that I had, where basically they didn't care if I was. They're like, well, we don't care if you're on your phone. Like,
Yeah.
if there's nobody at the door, there's nothing for you to do.
Right.
yeah.
And so I'm like, well, if they don't care if I'm on my phone, they don't care if I'm reading a book. And I read 200.
Amazing.
Like 200
The
books
event
that
in
year.
question, dear listener, was the global pandemic, in case you were trying to
Yes.
keep points. Okay, I'm going to throw, I haven't prepared Chadwick for this at all. I'm going to read 2 sentences to you, and you're going to tell me, this is Chadwick's story from Khyber, from the collection Khyber. Here's 2 sentences. They are dialogue. I want you to tell me why they are not attributed. So, for example, sentence 1, that ruse won't last long, period. We play smart. We don't need law, period. Now, there's no he said, she said. There's no who's talking. It is completely abandoned. In much of your writing, there is an abandonment of attributing the dialogue to the speaker.
writer.
Yeah. Now, we could throw compliments, but I want him to tell me, what do you have to do before you can abandon letting people know who's talking? Lyndon, who has not producer Lyndon on the podcast, is wildly waving from the distance. He doesn't want Chadwick to be able to answer this question. Go.
I know the answer. It's because if your characters have their own voices, you don't need to attribute to them.
And Chadwick just nodded
And
so
you
sagely.
shouldn't attribute to force yourself into that position.
Yes. So is this what you're confident to say that you should know who's talking?
Well, whether I know any more, I would know in the context of the story
Right.
if
Yeah, but
I
the
was
reader
reading
will know.
ahead.
Okay, so then what context? Let's talk about that. Let's get into mud. You want to set a voice of a character and make sure that it stands out separately from the voices of the other characters. What are the processes that you both use to bring voice to the character so that
I also noticed
attributions are not
I
necessary?
also noticed that you didn't choose a piece of dialogue from the character in that story that has a bit of a vocal
I did
tick
No, I didn't.
that easily identifies who he is.
Yeah. In fact, I specifically chose one where it ends in the same word. So it's like literally an echo of the previous statement, right? The ruse won't last long. We play smart. We don't need long. It's clearly two people responding to one another. The other thing that I really like about it, I'll point out what I think you do with these characters in particular, is one talks sparsely and one uses more commas. Literally and practically, one of them is divided by a comma in the middle and one is rarely.
Well, also one of them is more practical than the other.
Right.
There's that point of view, but one of them is the one who I would say Red is the one who keeps the pair of them, Needle and Red, alive, and Needle is the one who gets them into schemes. So my not reading any of the other context of the story and knowing that it's been years since I've wrote it and even years since I've looked at that story, I would say that Red is the one poo-pooing it, saying that the ruse won't last long, and Needle is the one assuring her that it won't need to.
Will you do it?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Oh, Larry, you're the best pal a guy ever had. Here, look. I want you to have this. Look, here. It's a souvenir from the London Bridge gift shop in Arizona.
It's the kind of thing that Red would say and the kind of thing that Needle would say. So to me, it's all character. If you build the character enough and then you give them things to say that they would say, it all just takes care of itself.
Okay, so now we're jumping up and down in the mud a little bit, but I'll allow it. You're talking about the difference between the writing and the shaping of the story after, right? Because as Stephen King says, to write is human, but to edit is divine, right? You can have a story. It's why, for example, you and I will both look at our old work and think, I bet there's something here, because we believe if you shape it enough there or carve away enough, there might be an element worth saving.
Well, I mean, and I still believe that there's an element worth saving to that first flawed novel of mine. I just don't want to rewrite that entire novel to make it work, which is what I would have to do. But in diving back in again, I think that there might be, there's lines and words that, and because they are all from the same novel, if I put them all in the same short story, they would work.
They'll work.
You don't think the story is worth it?
The story in total, I think might be worth it.
Here's the best part, dear listener.
But
I want to describe something
right
visual to
now.
you.
I have so many other things that I want to write and want to finish that the prospect of
as both of these, dear listener,
not a 10.
as both of these learned gentlemen are now talking about the story, the only way they've been able to enunciate is visually. They've been both making the size of the fish gestures like a story.
I was told we were now a visual podcast.
Right? No, but the reason I'm pointing this out is this is exactly what I'm saying. Is in order to think about the shape of this story, you were talking about the story, and Jonathan threw his arms wide. Like, the story is this big idea. And you were like, wow, the shape of the story. And you brought yours in real close. And this is a concept that, despite the number of words and lines, you're going to have to leave some out or put some in order to make it what it already is, to use your phrase.
The example I like to use, and I'm sure you've heard, is Zombie Orgies on the Moon. If you wrote a story called Zombie Orgies on the Moon, what just a thing it is,
Yeah.
And no amount of editing is going to make it more marketable or less marketable.
That's right. If you're all in at that title, then you know what to expect.
And if it's on
it is what it
Netflix, the
is.
zombie orgy on the moon won't happen until episode 8.
And some people want, and I always say, like, if it's a publishable book, there's no change you can make to it that makes it more marketable or less marketable. It just is what it is at a certain point.
Yeah. So then when we're talking about sword and sorcery, that's already self-selecting out a portion of the audience. If we're talking about sword and sorcery that's specifically inspired by the works of like Howard and Lovecraft, that's self-selecting out a huge portion of the audience.
If you're dialing that in.
But if
The
you're
question is, what do you want to do? What hasn't been done? Like, to get to your, I don't know where it is in your schematic there, but then it's like at the point where it's that dialed in, I feel, is where
That's where you as the individual writer can bring yourself to it, right?
That's
Like
where
when
you
I
should-
look at Draxus and I look at the characters from the Once Lands,
Draxus is
They're
trying
all
to take
vastly-
Race still in
they're all
and
vastly
put
different
Race
than
still
what
in
I'm
into
doing.
its shared world.
right from Dragonlance stuff.
Yeah,
From
it's
our
like-
youth.
Something that
Yeah.
it's not the same, but what if like that character I loved in Dragonlance had like they're evil,
Yeah.
more evil.
And specifically for the dear listener, you don't have to read all the books. I've read them, so you don't have to if you don't want to. But Raceland, because of the time it was being written and the style of story it was, there were a lot of guardrails on the story. And
Yeah,
you knew,
you didn't have the
despite
guardrails.
what Raceland would claim to be capable of, you would not see it.
Exactly.
You've taken the guardrails out.
Right. So it minds things like I love those stories, don't get me wrong, but I always is like, it feels like there's some guardrails to your metaphor here. Like, what if they didn't have the shackles of the genre they're in, and what if you put them in a dirtier, grimier, where he could be a cannibal, the kind of
Like,
thing,
and your Draxus stories are a good example of that. If you read the first page, and you can handle that she's eating a baby.
but I don't reveal it till you've already read it. This is the
Right.
trick of that first page.
Yeah, it's great. But if you're okay as a reader that this is what's in store for you,
right.
that's the beginning of the ride. And it's gonna go pretty hard.
What I like about fiction, unlike other genres that would be more visual or something, is I can tell you, like, I can have description of what's happening. You can think you know what you're seeing, and then I can change the parameters.
Right, because it wouldn't be notable to Draxus at all
At all.
that she's eating a baby.
It's not a problem.
But if you
Yeah.
have the spit turning
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the film version, and you're like, that's
see
clearly a
it.
baby,
Right.
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
But then once I hit that reveal, which is right away, but it's just delayed that you've read it, and then you hit the reveal. At that point, you're in and you're out of the story.
Yeah.
And to me, like, that's the thing I like. And if at that point you're in, you still might not like her.
Yeah.
In fact, you may be like, well, I'm kind of interested, but I don't really. What's going on here?
is
How
this
could
the
this
kind of
person be
the kind of
character?
story
Yeah.
where she gets her
Yeah.
comeuppance?
Yeah, like,
is this
yeah.
what
What
is
is-
this?
what's-
Or is she the villain? You have those questions.
And then I start to build into like some sympathetic aspects to her. Like the second story is very specific. And the second story, she does probably the most heinous thing she could possibly do. But you can see that, like, if she's willing to do that, then this must really matter to her
Right.
because she doesn't want to.
One of the things that I wanted to do with you two gentlemen, which has been really fun, which, by the way, dear listener, we don't do this line by line
No.
deconstruction of each other's work, except in contexts where it's limited. A writer's group is often also not going to do this kind of thing because we're coming to a story fully formed and asking why. In a writer's group, it is not yet formed, and you're asking why not. Right? Why not try this? Why not try this? Why not try this? And your group then, it's great that Chadwick added this layer to my schema, my strata. I thought it was author, the work, the line, the word, the thought, the reason. And in fact, the group is there first. And you have a group of people that you think, I could trust them with my unformed, unfinished work and take that criticism and grow from it. I think that's so important. But we're not in a position right now where we're asking of each other to challenge. It's not why not. I take for granted that the story that you will present to us for the shared world, all that work has been done before. And so when we have questions, I assume you have answers. I take for granted that you have answers. But when you're in a writer's group, and it's, I think, an important part, because we've all been part of long-running writers groups in parts of our life, it's important to know that the author probably doesn't know. They don't have answers yet. They don't know the reason. They're just trying stuff out. Little Gregory didn't know why his stories was so broken and fractured, but it's because I was absorbing like a sponge the cadence of the authors I was reading.
I was once visiting a friend of mine who's a writer as well, and he was asking me how this novel I was working on was going, this book I was working on. And I said, well, I started laying it out for him. Like, well, I go with the draft is in this state. It's got this problem, but I'm going to do this to solve that problem, and, so on and so forth. And here's my plan for it. And he goes, that's the only time I've ever asked a writer how their writing was going, and they told me.
Oh my gosh. People who don't know about writing, who ask how the book is going, do not want the answer. Because if we gave them the real answer about what's going on, it's like a hour-long treatise on our mental state. And what they want to know is like, is the plot fun?
Yeah.
Right?
It's like when someone asks you how you're doing. They don't really want to know. For the most part.
Well, I'll tell
They
you.
may
Let me tell
they
you.
don't really want to know. They just think they want to know.
Right? So, okay.
That's why in customer service, you don't ask how someone is doing.
Right.
Because
What if they told you?
they might tell you.
They might tell you, yes. So what I wanted to do is ask you what you guys were doing in your work here, and I didn't prepare you for it. We just wanted to talk about the shared world generally. We didn't talk about plot. We didn't talk about the world of the stories. We didn't talk about the settings. We didn't talk about the rules. We didn't talk about all those things that are often talked about in conversations about writing, because you can find those everywhere now. And I feel like one thing that'll be useful to us going forward as we continue to dig into what we do in the shared world is to be more vulnerable with the process of the written word, especially in this age where human authorship is now in question every time you read something. But to remind the people who are submitting that it's something you make up along the way. You get used to the path you're walking, you try to walk it, but there are lots of different ways to do it. Each of us has a very different process, and we all have a different reason for writing. There are thoughts that go into the stories that we work are all different. The words we use, our word choices are vastly different, even among us as drawing on the same genres. We still pick in different ingredients. How and why we use lines is so contextually baked into the kind of story, which then shapes the work, which then shapes the author, which then shapes the groups you're a part of. And so I just think that if we do this as we talk about the world we're sharing, maybe we should also share the process of making it. So, dear listener, this has been Super Pulp Science. And of course, the Shared World books, Kyber, Once Lands, Draxis, forthcoming, are all available.
They're all forthcoming.
Yeah. They're all available
Slash
where
available.
books are sold and available. They're also available in person at our events. But if you're also interested in writing in the world, we're interested in reading your writing.
Sharedworld.ca. I think you can submit there.
This has been Super Pulp Science. I'm GMB Kimichik, encouraging you all to join the fight, make comics, write books, stay in the mud.